even if you have really done the work and you have healed so much, there are going to be some things that are scary, because if, for instance, you weren't used to being respected, or you weren't used to having someone treat you with consideration, that's going to feel a little awkward at first, and you might not trust it. So you're going to need to be supporting yourself and be supported in working through that period where you can really trust this feeling good.
Welcome to the Thriving After Divorce podcast, where you learn the secrets to reclaim your life and turn your breakup into your breakthrough. Transformation expert, internationally published author, and online show host Tanya Marie Dubé will help you quickly pick up and move on as you tune into interviews with some pretty cool experts from around the world, showing you how to live your best life after divorce. If you're ready to learn the skills to finally put your divorce behind you for good, dig down really deep, and step into your highest self, then you're in the right place. Here's your host, online educator and mom of two, Tanya Marie Dubé.
Hi, everybody. It's Monday. How's everyone doing today? I'm so happy that you're back with me again. Thank you so much for showing up. I have an excellent interview for you lined up today that I'm doing with someone called Ellie Newman. But first, I would like to take this chance to remind you that I would love for you to like, comment, share, and review this podcast. Now, as many of you know, I have a goal to reach over 1 million women. So with your help, I know we can do this. So please share, like, comment, review with your colleagues and your friends and your family, because I know that we can reach this goal together. So thank you so much again for tuning in. This is amazing. My interview today is with Ellie Newman, who is a graduate of Georgetown Law. Ellie's undergraduate degree is in psychology, and she had a career as an alternative dispute resolution attorney and years of experience as a divorce mediator, communication strategist, and business coach, and she's developed her expertise in effective communication. As a skilled interviewer herself, Ellie has spent the last 6 years researching and interviewing thought leaders and scientists, world-class athletes, artists, and daring souls. Her engaging iTunes podcast is called That Got Me Thinking. It's deep into her mastery of the aforementioned content and her ability to impart it. So with that said, let's welcome the fabulous Ellie. Hi, Ellie. It's so good to see you and to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm great, and it's so wonderful to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. Now, I want everybody to know, if you ever hear us occasionally throughout this episode talk about how we're seeing each other, it's because we're also doing a video while we're doing this audio. So for everybody who's listening, Ellie is absolutely amazing. She's come a really long way in her career. I love what she's doing. So we're just going to jump right in, right, Ellie? Well, let's talk about who you serve and what got you to this place where you are right now.
It's interesting because there's a thread, I think, that's run through all of my work, and it took me quite a while to actually see what that thread was. And I think that's pretty true of a lot of people in our generation, and especially women, because women often have taken a break at some point to raise children or have had a shift in career for other reasons. I remember when I came out of law school, and I was thinking a few years later, all of my classmates, the females at least, were all going to be on Oprah, and we're going to be talking about how it was absolutely impossible to meet the expectations of our generation, that we were supposed to do it all, that we were supposed to, graduate at the top of our class, get into a great law firm, become partners, on track, also find a spouse, get married, have children, be the perfect mother, and do all this while we were polite, nice, and looked great. And so I think there was some navigation, and I think there were times in my career I thought that what I was doing ended up being disjointed. But in looking back, I can see that the thread that ran through it all was relationship and effective communication, and that we are all wired physiologically and emotionally to connect and to communicate, and we are cooperative beings. Research has shown again and again, we do better when we are cooperating rather than competing as individuals and also as a collective. And that the way that we cooperate and have effective relationships and can meet our goals more easily and more effectively is when we are in collaboration, and that is by communicating effectively. And I definitely know those were not skills that I learned growing up. I may have been lucky in that I was a middle child, and I'm also, I think, highly sensitive and pretty empathic. And so I didn't like conflict, so I was geared toward making any conflict stop as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think I paid close attention as to how to make that happen. And so that's probably how I ended up, after my law degree, doing alternative dispute resolution and with trying to resolve other people's conflicts. But definitely do not like conflicts in my own relationships, which I also realized. And so oftentimes, and I think this is important, I may not be doing the things in my personal relationships that I recommend other people to do, but at least I'm aware of what I should be doing.
Wow. Now let me ask you, because you said something that just I picked up really quickly. Do you think that you had a problem with people pleasing at all when you were a kid, specifically because you didn't like conflict and you were trying to look really quickly as ways to problem solve? I'm just curious to know.
Oh, no question. I remember taking Susan Beatty's quiz at the end of her book, Codependent No More, mm-hmm. and probably 35, 40 questions. And it said, if you have marked 10 of these positively, you have an issue. And I wanted to call her and say, well, what if I marked 35? Yes, definitely approach I'm working on it, and it still happens sometimes. But yes, I want to be liked. I want to please. I want to resolve any potential conflict.
Right. Okay. So now let's get to what it is that you do right now. So you've got this amazing podcast. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So I've got a podcast called That Got Me Thinking. It was originally called It's Relationship. I live in a small town, and I was working on a book called Less Mad, More Glad, a relationship book, because I realized that whether I was helping CEOs to resolve a conflict or partners in $1 million company to resolve issues in their relationship, it was exactly the same as what I was doing at home or what I was doing on the playground with a bunch of 6-year-olds, that it's all the same dynamics and it's all the same solutions. And so I was working on a book called Less Mad, More Glad. And I started a radio show, and I thought, well, I'm going to do a relationship show. Well, I learned quickly people do not want to talk about their relationships in a small town. And they don't even want the relationship spoken about, because you'll run into someone at the supermarket and they're like, oh, are you talking about so-and-so today? It's all relationship, whether it's a relationship with ourselves, with our spouse, with nature, with our passion. And again, the dynamics that run through that relationship and the rules that govern it are all the same. For the last 6 years, I've been interviewing thought leaders, whether they be daring souls, athletes, scientists, best-selling authors, about their passions, about their mindsets, about sort of, really, I think the thread is, how does the world work and how can we live our best lives?
Perfect. That's beautiful. I love it. I had to bring it up because I want people to know that you've got this, that it exists. I think it's really cool. 6 years is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, we talked in length the other day about relationships and behavior patterns. So I want to talk a little bit about this because this is the topic of this podcast episode. But can you expand on the importance of looking at our behavior patterns before jumping into something new?
I think I realized when I was a divorce mediator, I sort of had an expectation that most of the couples that I saw, I would think, well, maybe they weren't a great fit. Maybe they really do have irreconcilable differences. After a few years of mediating, what I realized was, I'd say 90% of the couples, it wasn't that they were a mismatch. It wasn't that they never should have gotten together. It wasn't that they had really grown apart. That was maybe at 5%. But 95%, I could see that it was more that they had gotten into these destructive patterns of communicating and problem solving, and that they would either avoid conflict, which caused trouble, which caused resentment and frustration and disappointment, or they would resolve conflict in a way that was really detrimental to the relationship. And they would also develop these patterns where one person would maybe take the role of in the conflict of, well, they would just give up, or they would not bring up a problem because the other person, there was imbalance of power. The other person would sort of take the powerful position in this dynamic, and they would get what they want by intimidating or bullying or making the other person feel bad. So it really was these patterns, these negative patterns of resolving conflict that were in the way of the relationship. And the relationship get to the point where one of the parties would just cry uncle. And often the other one wouldn't even realize what the problems had been. And they might have gotten to a point finally through this mediation where they're like, oh, hey, wait, no, I value this relationship. I do want to try to fix it. But the other person was just done because they'd been putting up and shutting up or been resentful and frustrated for just far too long.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so what is your advice in shifting that?
So within the relationship, creating a balance of power, I think, is really important. There's lots of research out there, a lot by John Gottman, who talks about, when talking about fight or flight, about the value of fighting right and moving towards rather than away. And his research shows that these are the two most important steps of maintaining and sustaining a relationship. And when we choose to move towards rather than away, we're able to fight and reconcile constructively. And then we also become confident in our ability to fight right. And that's what really changes the relationship, because we then are more willing to be vulnerable, to open up, to know that we've got a partner in this, and that it's not a competition, that these conflicts aren't a win-lose battle, and it's not you or me, and it's about us. And so you know that the other person is there with you, and that what's best for you is going to be best for the other person and the relationship, because you're going to switch the way that you resolve conflict to be about an interest-based negotiation. So we're going to look at what's good for me, what's good for you, what's that third solution. It's not either, Tanya, you get your way or I get my way. And so I'm not going to try to convince you to see it my way, or to convince you to not what you want, to try to talk you out of wanting what you want, or to sell my position, how it's so much better. Because we're going to look for something together that is that third solution that satisfies all your interests and it also satisfies mine. And we're not going to compromise, because that's milquetoast. We're not going to pick something that is like not really what I want and not really what you want, because in the long run, what kind of relationship is that going to be? I'm going to be like, whenever I'm with Tanya, I end up doing something that isn't really what I want, or I end up getting something that's not quite exactly what I'm hoping for.
Now, let me ask you this. So all things being equal and healthy, two people who are, both healthy can meet in the middle, find a space to be able to do this constructively. That's awesome. What if we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder people? What if, I don't even know your views on this, but a lot of the women who find me and who are listening to this podcast, this is like a really serious issue for them in their lives, and negotiating and trying to have a healthy post-marriage relationship is almost next to impossible.
Okay, so I'd say there's a couple different questions in there, because one is your relationship with a narcissist, and going forward post-divorce, how do you make sure you don't end up with another one?
Yes.
Because I think that's a critical issue. That so often we think, okay, thank goodness I'm out of this relationship. I'm moving on. I'm going to get something and someone so different. And I think that can be a trap. And I'm going to back up just a little bit too, because you said two healthy people. And we've all got our issues, right? We've all got baggage. And so, yes, we're all kind of perfect how we are, and we don't really need fixing, but we do need awareness. We need a self-awareness, and that might take therapy. It might take self-work. It might take, a lot of different avenues for that. But definitely when we come out of a relationship, we want to be able to look at our role in it. We want to be able to step back somehow and look at the relationship and look at our role in it, because whatever those dynamics were, the positive ones and the negative ones, and we want to look at both, we want to see how they're still playing currently in our lives. And we want to see what was it, where were our hot spots, what buttons were being pushed, what role did we play in it, so that we can start to shift. Because otherwise we will end up, we meet someone, we think, oh, they're so different, but we will end up with the same person and the same story. Lori Gottlieb just wrote a great book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. She's a psychotherapist and a best-selling author on a couple books. And she has one character in her book who's a patient, Charlotte. And she talks in detail about, and she mentions how Freud calls this repetition compulsion. And she talks about how at the beginning, Charlotte keeps getting the same kind of guys. And it's because her unconscious is is attracted to these people because she wants to resolve the hurts of her family of origin, right? She wants to resolve those. So she thinks, well, maybe I'll choose this person who seems different, but I'll be able to fix those old hurts. I'll be able to make it different. I'll be able to get from him what I want in a way that I wasn't able to get from relationships in my past, or maybe from my family of origin relationships. And so she's not consciously doing this, but she's choosing people that actually she's going to be running these same dynamics, because this time she's hoping it'll be different.
Mm-hmm.
The shift is, once Charlotte does the self-work, or any of us do the self-work, this is the tricky piece, because at first we probably are not going to be attracted to people that are going to treat us differently, because we've been patterned to be attracted to people that play those old dynamics. And so that gets tricky in that in-between space where we've started to shift and we're ready to shift, but we don't really find those people who are what you called healthy attractive. There's not these things that are like, oh yes, our radar that's saying, oh, them, them, them. So we have to try out different kinds of relationships. We have to maybe give people a little more chance. Maybe we aren't having those fireworks right at the beginning. And not that you should settle for being in a relationship without the fireworks, but you're going to learn to have different kinds of ones. But maybe those buttons aren't being pushed right away with that person. And even if you have really done the work and you have healed so much, there are going to be some things that are scary, because if, for instance, you weren't used to being respected, or you weren't used to having someone treat you with consideration, that's going to feel a little awkward at first, and you might not trust it. So you're going to need to be supporting yourself and be supported in working through that period where you can really trust this feeling good and this relationship being different in a positive way.
That's amazing. I love everything you just said, and I completely lived through this myself. Now, I've been going through separation for the last 3 years, as you know, and I've gone through all of this. Isn't that funny? I think that with many of my relationships in the past, because I think we repeat these narcissistic patterns, don't we? So without doing the work, like you said, I found myself again and again, always, and you're right about the character in that book. You know, your take on that character in the book is that we will look for things around us to play out to what our expectations are, which is where we get to with belief systems, and how, you know, we will find the ways to validate our belief systems by our, you know, through our outside world. That's really important to pay attention to.
It is, right? What's the mirror? When we see things being, you know, if you ask Einstein, it's all energy, right? And it's attracting energy. And at another level, it's like holding up this mirror. What are these people and these experiences reflecting in us as far as what we believe we deserve, what we believe we can have, what we've been patterned to expect? And so I know when you and I talked before, you talked about a lot of people come out of divorce and they're ready to start dating, right? They've made this huge change in this breakup, and that has its own emotional tolls, right, of going through this breakup. Our brains are wired for bonding, right? And when someone breaks up or we break up with someone, it really is evolutionarily a death threat. Okay, am I going to exist? Will I continue to exist? And so we have to kind of ride that out, that if we were rejected, or even the breakup other way, that, you know, there's going to be some form of kind of withdrawal from the relationship and from the energy of that. And if we've been married and we're going through a divorce, we have to be able to kind of go through the emotional divorce as well. Mm-hmm. But I think, you know, if you're ready to date, then there's nothing wrong with that, as long as, what I would say, you're going to date consciously. And so I think the first step in that is to really take stock in the past relationship, right? Maybe write down, you know, maybe there were some things that were positive. What were the positive things? And write down all the things that were negative. And not because we want to dwell on the past, and not because we're going to live there, but that because we're going to use it to inform us going forward. Mm-hmm. And so
I like what else you said too, about not looking just at what we're used to seeing when we start dating, but to go a little bit deeper. And it's okay if all of the normal bells and whistles aren't going off for us right at the beginning. Like, just spend that time trying different relationships, trying out different people, and just go deeper into that deeper stuff.
And I think that the key is to have a sense of personal power. And that is where it gets tricky with taking responsibility. And I think especially if you were in a relationship with a narcissist, is that narcissist is responsible for their behavior 100%. You also are responsible for your behavior 100%
Mm-hmm.
within that dance that you were doing with the narcissist. And that's very different than saying blame.
Mm-hmm.
I think it traps us if we blame the other person. And it doesn't mean that they didn't do things that were bad and unpleasant and even wrong from an objective perspective. But the blame puts us in a victim mentality. And so it doesn't get anywhere. It robs us of our personal power. The hard part about taking personal power and taking responsibility for your actions within this relationship, and I want people to think of it as a dance. So your actions within this dance, the steps that you were doing, the hard part is, yeah, that might not feel that good. That might cause you some pain. That might cause you some discomfort. But it also gives you the magic wand, right? It gives you the superpower because now you are taking 100% of the responsibility consciously, which means, yes, you have to say, wow, I participated, but you can also say, wow, I don't ever have to participate again in that dance. Mm-hmm. And so it helps also to create this new mindset, right? This new mindset of having the relationship that you do want is possible. And when you can stop blaming the other person, you can stop blaming yourself as well. And you can sort of say, all right, that was not something that was healthy. It wasn't something that felt good. I don't want to do that again. And so you can go into this new relationship trusting yourself more. Mm-hmm. Knowing that, well, I can trust my what I want, what I don't want, and my ability to get it.
That's a huge thing, being able to trust ourselves, especially after we've been through toxic relationships. And maybe even this divorce that anyone who's listening to is going through right now wasn't that toxic relationship. We still do carry some stuff over if we've never dealt with it. So trusting ourselves, that's just such a big thing when we're coming out of divorce, isn't it?
I think it's huge. And I think the scariest hurdle to get over is to be able to choose to look at the relationship and your role in it honestly. Mm-hmm. And that, we don't want to do that, I think, in most unpleasant situations because it doesn't feel good at first. Yeah. But it really is, if you can just think of it as, diving in the pool, and maybe the pool's kind of cold at first, it doesn't feel good, but the only way that you can get to that other side, if you want to get out, is to swim through that, right? If you want to get to the other side. I mean, otherwise you jump out and you jump back on the side, but you're stuck there. So you have to kind of say, okay, I'm gonna be prepared for what might be uncomfortable for a little while, but I know I can do it. I've got my plan. I jump in, I'm swimming through it, and I come out the other side.
One of the things that I did when I left my marriage, I made a very conscious decision that I was going to start doing the things that I always wanted to do that I put off or put aside because of this, that, or the other thing. And I just didn't pursue these things that I loved. So they sort of fell to the wayside. But one of the things that helped me through that whole process was saying yes to things and being open and trying something new, trying on a new way of thinking, right? Trying new people, just saying yes in my life instead of not trusting myself and my natural instinct to be closed off because I was hurt or vulnerable.
Which makes sense, right? And that's a tricky place as well because you feel like, well, wait, I feel like I was trusting myself before and I thought I was following my instincts and it didn't turn out very well. So how am I going to be able to trust myself this time to know that I actually am making healthier, better choices that are going to lead to a different result? Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes, and especially if we've been in a really painful relationship and for a long time, we've probably shut off that part of ourselves that we can trust, that voice inside, that you can call it your intuition or your knowing or that element that does know what we want, what's right for us. And that's something you can practice as well. You talk about practicing, and you can practice that just in the tiniest way. Walking through a garden and noticing which flower do you think is the prettiest. Trying different foods and thinking, do I like that or not like that? Starting to do things just in your daily life in the smallest ways and noticing your response to them, and then honoring that response. And whether it's to new people, to things, to situations, and also noticing your triggers. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you have to act on them in any way, but noticing your triggers. And sometimes you will act on them, and that's okay. And then tell yourself, next time, I'm going to try to create a space between the time of the trigger and the responding. And so that I'm going to be able to wait a little bit and notice that, yes, I have that trigger still, but I'm going to be in that space where I haven't responded yet to be able to choose to respond differently, because that's really how we break our patterns.
And I've created something in the past, and I'll talk about it here, where I think, and I know that you like plans too. I know that you like making a plan, because we talked about this when we were talking on the phone, but this is something separate. But the plan for this for me was to write down all of the things that would happen, my triggers, the way I would normally respond and the way I should respond. And then have this out. I mean, it's not a list of like 100 things, but just have this out where I can see it. And then before I have an emotional reaction, it's very hard to do, and I'm not perfect at it yet, but it is helping. It's a roadmap. Before I have an emotional reaction to something, I can stop, take a breath, look at my list. If this trigger's on that list, I see how I'm ready to respond, because it'll say how you normally respond, right? Like an emotional crazy person. And then how
like a normal person.
Yeah, like a normal person having a normal human reaction, emotion
Exactly.
to a normal situation. So, or to an abnormal situation. But then it would show me how I want to show up. Right. So I made this plan for myself, and I teach my clients to do the same thing. And it's really useful. The trick is in being able to tell yourself that you are not going to respond right away. You're going to take a breath. And one of the ways that I trained myself how to do this was with shopping, believe it or not. I don't even think I've ever talked about this before on air, but with shopping. So I made a decision that I was not going to be impulsive with the things that I love to buy, like shoes and purses and makeup even. I would tell myself, if 24 hours can go by and I still need to have this thing, I will go back and buy it. So this is how I sort of started to teach myself to hold off, don't react right away. And it's helped me in this area too, going through my separation. So I just wanted to bring that up because we were talking about.
I think that's so important. And I think that Gabrielle Hartley wrote a book called Better Apart. And she's a litigator, divorce attorney, mediator. And she talks about doing that with her clients in divorce. Don't respond for 24 hours. If you get something, a call or an email or something happens, it's just making you so mad. And I do that in my daily life because I'm a reactor. I mean, I jump on that injustice.
Me too.
On that injustice wagon, and man, I am going to go and do something and tell people what's what. And so I have to tell myself, I'm going to send an email, and I'm going to I got to wait. I know in William Ury says in his book, Getting Past No, if you react from that space, even no matter how justified you might be of just being angry and righteous, and you are going to give the best speech you'll ever live to regret. And it's so right? We have to get where we are acting, not reacting. And whether it takes 10 seconds or 24 hours or even a couple days, we don't have to react. And I think that's so empowering. I can remember when I'd been through a really difficult breakup and had a hard time getting through to the other side. And I had a friend over for lunch, and my phone rang, and this person that I'd broken up with months ago had called and left a message on my answering machine. And I just must have looked at my friend in such panic. And I remember him looking at me and saying, you don't have to call him back. Just because he called you, you don't have to call back. And I'm telling you, that was one of the most liberating moments of my life, because I don't think it had ever dawned on me that I didn't have to call back. Mm-hmm. And I think that since the years since then, that has stuck in my toolbox as a reminder that, just because someone else wants something, just because someone else has asked for something, it doesn't mean that I have to respond in kind, that I can always say no in whatever manner. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of any healthy relationship and any healthy ability to have honest and productive communication, is that it's okay for either party to say no, because it won't be okay to ask the question if it's not okay to say no.
That's really powerful. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think the need to respond quickly could possibly come from growing up in a home full of tons of people?
Well, I think it goes back to the first thing you said of being a pleaser.
Right.
The idea that, we have someone ask something of you, want something of you, if you can do it, it's your job to say yes, right? Because I think as in a role of codependency, that's where your value lies. Your value lies in being able to make things better, help the other person, in rescuing in whatever way that ends up being. And I think part of it is then always showing up for someone whenever they ask for whatever they ask.
Now, I want to segue just a little bit here, still keeping in line with, making a plan. You and I seem to do something similar, I think, in our work with clients, because we talked a little bit about this and I was going over my notes. I was like, I got to ask you more about this. So you told me that you create a list with your clients around what they actually want, making a plan for their lives. So I love this. I am all over this. Like, I'm a planning kind of person with pen to paper. So can you explain a little bit more about that process to me?
Yeah. And I think you're a better planner than I am. Because in my daily life, I wouldn't say I'm as good at I make a list in the morning of kind of what I have to get done, because I think that's super satisfying to be able to cross those things off the list and also can get them out of your head. So I think, especially if you're not being able to sleep at night, have a pad of paper by your bed and get it all out of your head and onto that list so that you don't have to carry it around with you. Mm-hmm. I definitely encourage people who are looking for a new partner to make a list of the qualities that they want in their partner. And beyond that, the qualities that they want in the relationship, which I think is even more important. And with that, you're going to put in your cares, your concerns, your interests. When I had sort of realized that I had these issues with codependency and not, okay, I need to do something about this. Why do I keep choosing these same people that I'm with that I need to convince that I'm worth being with and show that, I have this value? I remember getting to the point where I had done a lot of self-work where I was like, you know what, I'm done. I would rather be alone than play this same scenario again. And in that same point, I was like, I'm going to make a list of what I do want. So really focusing on in the list, not the things I didn't want, but what did I want to experience in the relationship? That I wanted to be with someone who appreciated my intellect, that was a person who took responsibility for life and didn't play the victim and blame game, that if something wasn't going the way they wanted to, they would take some action to make it different. So I had 50 things on my list.
That's good.
And I think
because you should be very specific.
I think the key is to look at your list and say, once you've written it down, why do you want that with each item? And what is the essence of what you want behind the item? And I think that that's key to the difference between being a successful list and one that maybe isn't going to find you the partner that you want. Because a lot of times we have ideas about the kind of person that we want to be with or the kind of person that will be the best fit for us. And I think that's what gets us into trouble oftentimes, because those things that we've decided are going to be the aspects or the qualities of that human don't necessarily equate to getting us the kind of relationship and the experience that we want.
That is such a good point. Yeah, that's such a good point. You want to know what that makes me think of? I once hired a coach right at the beginning of this whole separation divorce thing. And she said, I think one of the problems you have is that you think you know what it is that you need. I think you think you're so set on what it is that you want and what it is that you need, but there's something deeper. And so we did that work.
And I think we can trust knowing what we need, but we might not know what package it's going to come in, right?
Yeah.
We might not know what it's going to look like. We might not know how tall it is, or what color eyes it has. Those are the places where we get tripped up. Because we make that connection that this is going to look like this. And I know in the metaphysical world, they always are talking about, when you ask for something, you ask for this or something better. And I think you can trust your instinct on the this. And you can also decide that you changed your mind. You might ask for something, look for something, seek to have something, and then decide, wow, this doesn't feel like I thought it would. I want something else. And I think that frees us up to be able to have the confidence to choose. Because I think so many people get stuck, especially after you've come out of a really negative relationship, that you don't trust yourself to choose. And so we have to be able to say we'll have our own backs, and that if we put something out there and it's not feeling the way we thought, and we don't like it, that we can say, okay, I don't like that anymore, or I was wrong, I didn't like it in the first place. And that's okay.
That's totally okay. Now, you and I talked about the importance of really looking at the broken relationship and how it served us. What did we get out of that? So could we talk a little bit more about that?
We can, and we can even talk about it in relationship to dating, because I think one of the things that's really important when you set off on dating again is to look where you want to go. So we are going to look forward and look at what we want to have, but we're going to do it consciously, which means we have to be really paying attention to what were those disruptors in the last relationship, right? And we also need to be honest as far as not pretending to be someone other than who you are. So if you're dating and you don't like spending your time in a bar, playing pool, don't say, well, I'm dating, I have to go along and I want them to want me, so I need to pretend that I'm this other person. The same thing, like you can be open to things, and maybe, you've never been to the opera before and you're going to go because this other person's really interested, but you need to be honest about whether or not you liked it or not, because if not, in the long run, that's going to come back to bite you. And that other person's going to be like, wait, you said you liked all these things, you acted as if you did, and now you don't. So there's going to be trouble there, which doesn't mean you can't change your mind later on. But we want to look at these disruptors, as you said, these negative things in relationships, as opportunities for our growth. So instead of kind of beating ourselves up for ways that weren't serving us, and also with that, looking at the ways that what we are now looking at as negative aspects of the relationship were serving us. I think, as you said, like that's a critical thing to be aware of, because there's always a why. Why were we willing to stay? Why were we willing to be treated this way? Why were we willing to engage in this manner? Why were we willing to not speak up? We don't want to beat ourselves up for those things, because there were really valid reasons. And we learn by looking at those. How was it serving us? Not like, oh, we're a glutton for punishment, but how was it serving us in as far as it was serving where we were then? It was serving us as far as what we thought we could have, and our skills and abilities of how to have something different. So we want to look at those. We don't want to dwell on them as far as beating ourselves up about them, but we want to be aware of them going forward to see if those lights are kind of dinging as we go forward. And we want to be able to embrace our emotions, right? And know that the emotions that we're having to certain people and experiences, that those are helpful and they're good and they're just a communication. And that we let ourselves feel it, like a river, it washes over us and we move beyond it. And so we're not having to fight all this stuff from our past as we go forward.
Right. Wow. I love all of that. You look like you wanted to say something else.
No, I was just like, I have a list. I have a list of things. And before we stop, we'll kind of
I love it.
throw those out as for keeping people's
we were
minds
talking,
going forward.
yeah, for sure. We were talking about that disconnect between the relationship and what we want. And we want to make sure that those bridges are still intact. Yeah. So that we understand what we've been through and how we served that, and then what we want in the future so that we are able to get it.
Absolutely. Because otherwise, you really, unless you are conscious of what those disconnects were, it's going to be really difficult to solve for them. And that's how you have a different relationship, right? Is to recognize what dance steps you were doing and then look and see what's the new dance I want to have. And then what steps does that take to be doing that new dance? And that you can practice all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's what it takes. It takes practice. And this is why I say, of course, most of us, when we get out of a toxic relationship, especially if it was for a long period of time, we probably were neglected. We weren't being treated properly. We're starving for attention and starving for affection, that we jump right into a new relationship with somebody else. And they always end up being exactly like the person you were just with, which is what you and I have already touched on this before. So this is why I suggest to people to not do this, to spend 1 year figuring out what those triggers are, what those behavior patterns are, work on our own self-love, put ourselves first in this way, start a routine, meditate, all of that stuff so that we can get really solid with who we are. And then the plan, right? The list for what you want. That's so important.
And I think it's critical that you throw out meditating, and there's so much talk these days about mindfulness, and mindfulness is definitely the solution, but how you're going to get there is going to be individual to each person. Maybe you tried meditating and it doesn't work for you. Well, what does work for you? Mm-hmm. What is it that you can say that you can put into your routine on a daily basis that creates that space where you are going to be able to come from action, not reaction? Mm-hmm. What's going to be able to create for you daily that space where you trust your instinct, where you trust your reaction to something, where you can start being honest with yourself about what you want and then being able to go out and get it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's writing in a journal, maybe it's meditating, maybe it's exercise. And you'll recognize what it is and put it to yourself like a prescription from a doctor, that this is what I need each day to get grounded, to get into a space where I feel comfortable physically and emotionally, so that I can go through my day where I'm acting rather than reacting.
Wow, that's such a good point. I wanted to ask you, what are some, aside from the things that we've talked about today, but what do you think, in your heart, what are some of the core beliefs that we should have, that we should adopt so that we can stop negative patterns from taking over our lives?
I think the biggest one is, I deserve this much good. I think come from most of us, a Judeo-Christian or some other religious cultural frame. And if you just look at sort of American culture generally, don't fly too high. I guess that's Greek. The wings of your wings will get burned. You try to fly too high to the sun. Don't think too much of yourself. Don't be a smart aleck. In the Jewish tradition, the evil eye. You better not have too much good because you're going to get knocked down back to size. And you better be humble and not think too much of yourself. Well, that's a problem. And I think it really is not the way the world works. We tend to get more of what we have, typically not less. And so if we think that the world is, has got our back, and we can start to believe that it'll have it more and more, that if we think we deserve positive experiences, we'll have more and more positive experiences. And so I think to shift that belief that we are deserving and that we don't live in a system of retribution, where it's not a balanced scale. It's not that if something good happens, something bad has to balance it out, that we're safe, that it's safe to be and to want. And then I think we need a skill set. And the biggest, I think, first step, once we can kind of get to the sense that we deserve what we want, is being able to figure out what we want and then be able to ask for it in a way that that is constructive and feels good.
And so you had a mantra that you said to me. Do you remember to go with this? Do you want me just to say it out loud so you don't have to put you on the spot? But you said that we should say, I deserve that much good in my life.
Right? Yeah. And I think especially when things start to get good, because if we aren't used to that, I think that's when we start to put the brakes on. Because all of a sudden panic. One, maybe we're not used to feeling this good. So that alone is going to bring up some anxiety. But on top of that, if we feel like there's going to be some price to pay, we're going to put on the brakes and not allow ourselves to either have that happy experience continue or to personally experience the joy from it. So either way, we're going to stop it.
Wow. So now we're wrapping up our interview, but I wanted to know, do you have any parting words for everyone who's listening?
I do. I want to just set people off with some things to think about when they are approaching change. And so we'll read off a quick list, and some or maybe none, but maybe some will connect with the listeners and they can just think about it for a few days. Changing behavior takes practice and it takes time to create new habits. It's an ongoing process. Life's dynamic and one must constantly recalibrate. So what's working in this moment might not, and this can be scary, might not work in the next, and that's okay. Perfection isn't the goal. It's natural to react and act poorly at times, and that's perfectly fine. That's being human. You get lots of chances. So if at first you don't succeed, keep on trying. Pay attention. I had a bumper sticker that said, "Don't believe everything you think." And I think that that's something to have in your mind with your own going forward and when we're relating to others. Maybe we make up these whole narratives about ourselves and about other people and about possibility and about our relationships. And we have to remind ourselves that maybe they're true. Pay attention, determine if your behavior advanced your cause. If not, make adjustments. Recognize success when you have it. Pat yourself on the back, give yourself a high five. And then remember to evaluate and reevaluate. Look at your relationships. Are they supporting you? Are they supporting your life goals? Are the people in your life that you're bringing into your life supporting your relationship and your life goals?
Those are amazing. I love all of those. Thank you so much. You've been so open and candid, and I appreciate everything that you said today. You've definitely shed some light on some things that maybe some of us haven't even really given ourselves a lot of time to think about. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's just a super pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you. Thank you. For everybody who's listening, I'm going to put Ellie's website in the show notes, so please look for it there. For those of you who want it now, it's ellienewman.com. I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's listening. Thanks again, Ellie. You are listening to Thriving After Divorce Radio Podcast, and I am your host, Tanya Marie Dubé, and we will see you same time next week. Bye.
Bye, Tanya. Thank you so much.
Bye, Ellie. Thank you again so much for joining us on the Thriving After Divorce Radio Podcast. We're coming to you every Monday morning so that you can start your week with intention and some powerful advice for what you're dealing with. So please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends and your family. My goal is to help change 1 million lives with this work, because when you teach a woman, you teach an entire community. Everybody benefits and the love spreads. So please feel free to comment, review, share, and like. With your help, I know I can reach this goal. So have a beautiful day, and we will see you next week.